was home alone that night. I don't remember why. Maybe my parents had a work trip, or maybe they were visiting friends. Whatever the reason, I had the entire house to myself, and that meant one thing: StarCraft marathon. At 16, I was completely obsessed with gaming. I'd spend entire weekends locked in my room, headphones on, playing until my fingers went numb. That night was no different. My room was the only one lit in the entire house, a glowing island in the dark. I was deep in the game, completely focused, when the doorbell rang. Twice. Fast. I froze for a second, caught off guard. 10:42 p.m. Who the hell rings a doorbell at this hour? I hesitated. A neighbor? A delivery guy at the wrong house? Either way, I had no interest in getting up. Then it rang again. Ding dong. Ding dong. I groaned, threw off my headphones, and jogged to the door. Better to deal with it and get back to my game. "Who is it?" I called out, standing behind the locked door. A soft voice responded, faint, almost a whisper. I flicked on the porch light and peered through the peephole. A woman stood outside, older, maybe late 60s. She had shoulder-length gray hair and a thin frame. But the first thing I noticed was her smile. Too wide, too still, as if frozen on her face. Her hands were hidden behind her back. I swallowed hard. Something about that detail didn't sit right with me. I didn't open the door. Something about her posture, her expression. It was wrong. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She tilted her head slightly. "I need to use a phone," she said softly. "Could I come inside?" That was an immediate no. I wasn't stupid. Since I was a kid, my parents drilled one rule into my head: never let a stranger inside. And that included sweet-looking old ladies. "There's a gas station a few blocks away," I said, trying to sound casual. "They probably have a phone." Her smile didn't change, but her eyes did. "It's really rude," she said, her voice oddly calm, "to turn away an old lady asking for help." I hesitated. She wasn't leaving. My fingers tightened on the doorknob. "Sorry, but my parents don't let me open the door for strangers." Her expression didn't shift. She just stood there. Then, slowly, she stepped back off the porch and walked away. But she wasn't heading toward the street. She was walking around the side of the house. I shut the door fast and locked it. My heart was pounding. And then, from the side of the house, tap, tap, tap against my bedroom window. I stood frozen in the hallway. I knew she was outside my window. I wanted to go back to my room, peek out, but something told me I didn't want to see her face again. Then came the metallic clinking, a slow, deliberate tapping against the glass. I turned off the sound on my computer. The game didn't matter anymore. The tapping continued, steady, rhythmic, too precise. I took a deep breath and inched toward the window. I lifted the curtain just a tiny bit and nearly choked on my own breath. She was right there, inches from the glass, still smiling, and in her hand she was tapping a knife against my window. I dropped the curtain and stumbled backward. My chest was tight, my breathing quick. What the hell was she doing? I grabbed the metal baseball bat I kept under my bed. My hands were shaking, but I felt better having something to hold. The tapping stopped. Silence. I inched toward my window again and, against my better judgment, lifted the curtain just enough to peek outside. She was gone. The only thing left was a faint, greasy smudge on the glass where her face had been. My stomach turned. Then, ding-dong, ding-dong, the doorbell. Again. It wasn't her. It was a man's voice this time. "Hey, sorry to bother you. Have you seen my mom?" My stomach dropped. The guy outside cleared his throat. "She's older, kinda confused sometimes. She wandered off and I think she might have stopped by here." I swallowed hard. Was this real? Maybe she really was lost. Maybe this was her son. Maybe I'd just been overreacting the whole time. But I couldn't shake this feeling. Something wasn't adding up. I took a slow breath. Yeah, she came by earlier, I said through the door. She left though. I don't know where she went. He sighed. Damn. All right. Do you mind if I come in for a second? Just to... Nope. I cut him off. Sorry, man. My parents don't like strangers coming inside. There was a pause. Then, real low, he said, "That's smart." My stomach turned. Something about the way he said it, like he knew exactly why I wasn't opening the door. "Do you think she might have gone around back?" he asked. I hesitated. "The backyard. That's where I last saw her." I forced my voice to stay even. "You can check if you want." "Thanks, man. I'll do that." I heard footsteps on the walkway, heading toward the side of the house. I waited a few seconds, then rushed to my kitchen window, the one that overlooked the backyard. I peered out. Nothing. No man. No woman. No movement. I felt sick. Why didn't he go look for her? And more importantly, where the hell did he go? I stayed by the window, gripping the bat, trying to steady my breathing. The guy had said he was checking the backyard, but he wasn't there. I didn't see him. I didn't hear footsteps. It was like he had vanished. I crept away from the window, every nerve in my body screaming at me to do something. Call the police, run, hide, anything. Then, out of nowhere, a soft creaking sound. My blood ran cold. It came from the back door, the door that led to my kitchen. I sucked in a breath and tiptoed toward it. My heart was hammering so loud I thought they might hear it. I peered through the small window on the door. Nothing. Just the empty yard, barely lit by the streetlights. I let out a slow, shaky exhale. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was overreacting. Then I noticed something. The back door's lock. It was unlocked. I hadn't unlocked it. My skin prickled. A wave of pure panic shot through me. They were inside. I backed away from the kitchen, every muscle in my body screaming, "Run!" I needed to get out. Now. But before I could even think, I heard it. Footsteps. Inside the house. Not from the kitchen. Not from the front door. From the hallway. My hallway. A place that should have been empty. I clutched the bat, my palms sweaty, my breath shallow. The footsteps stopped. A voice spoke. "We know you're in here." My stomach twisted into a knot. The voice wasn't deep. It wasn't aggressive. It was the old woman. She sounded almost amused. I didn't move. The air was thick with silence. Then, a slow knock on my bedroom door. I almost screamed. They were in my bedroom. Somehow, while I was checking the back door, while I was panicking, one of them had slipped inside and gone straight to my room. I wasn't alone in the house anymore. I took a shaky step back. My mind was racing. How the hell did she get in? Then another realization hit me. The man. I never saw where he went. Was he already inside before I locked the door? Was he in here the whole time? I could feel my pulse in my ears. My brain was screaming at me to move, to act. Then, the knocking stopped. Silence. No voices. No footsteps. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and bolted for the front door, but before I could even grab the knob, a hand slammed against the glass window. I barely bit back a yell. The old woman was standing there. Her smile was gone. She just stared at me. Then slowly, she shook her head. I took a step back, every part of me screaming to run. Then, she raised one hand and pointed. Behind me. I didn't want to turn around. I had to turn around. I did. And I saw him, the man, standing in my living room, my body locked up. He was just standing there, still, watching me, not moving. His expression was blank. His eyes didn't blink. I gripped the bat so tight my fingers went numb. "What do you want?" My voice barely worked. The man finally moved. He tilted his head. Then, he smiled. And he whispered something I'll never forget. "You're smart, but not smart enough." My lungs seized up. That was the same thing he said earlier. They weren't just picking random houses. They had been watching me. They knew. Then, before I could react, the lights flickered out, pitch black. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't stop. I just ran. I could hear them behind me. Footsteps, slow and steady. They weren't in a rush, because they knew. I grabbed my keys from the counter and threw myself out the front door. I didn't look back. I ran straight to my neighbor's house and pounded on the door like a madman. Lights flicked on. The door swung open. Mr. Patterson, my 60-year-old neighbor, stood there confused and half asleep. Before I could even speak, before I could even get the words out, I turned back toward my house. The front door was wide open, but inside, no one. No old woman, no man. Just my empty, silent house. The police showed up. They searched the house. Nothing was stolen. No signs of forced entry. Just 2 sets of muddy footprints. One from an older woman, one from a younger man. They checked the security cameras from Mr. Patterson's house. At exactly 11:32 p.m., they saw me run out. And exactly 30 seconds later, they saw both of them leave my house. They walked slowly, side by side, straight into the woods. The police never found them. And the worst part? A week later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, no name. Just a small folded piece of paper. 4 words. See you next time. It was barely past 4 a.m. when I got out of the Uber. The streets were dead silent, except for the distant hum of a car passing by. My head was pounding from the mix of cheap beer and lack of sleep, and the cold January air only made it worse. The Uber driver, some older guy with tired eyes, glanced at me in the rearview mirror before I got out. "You sure you're good, man?" he asked. I nodded, rubbing my temple. "Yeah, just need some sleep." He hesitated for a second. "It's a dangerous night to be out alone." I just gave a half-hearted chuckle and shut the door behind me. The walk up to my townhouse felt longer than usual. My feet dragged with every step, and when I finally reached the front door, I fumbled with my keys way longer than I should have. Something felt off, but I chalked it up to exhaustion. Before stepping inside, I noticed something weird. A faint flickering light inside the house. It was quick, like a reflection bouncing off the hallway wall. Maybe from a car passing by. Either way, I was too tired to think about it. I pushed the door open, tossed my stuff on the floor, and stumbled straight to the kitchen. Popped an ibuprofen, downed a glass of water, then collapsed onto the couch. My head was still killing me, so I just laid there, eyes shut, trying to ignore the pain. I had no idea how much time passed, but then the doorbell rang. At first, I thought I imagined it, but then it rang again and again. It wasn't just a single press, it was fast, impatient, like whoever was outside really wanted to get in. I groaned, rolling onto my side. My head was still spinning, and the last thing I wanted was to deal with some random idiot at my door. Maybe a drunk neighbor? A delivery mistake? Whatever it was, I wasn't getting up. The ringing stopped. I let out a breath and closed my eyes again, hoping for sleep. Then came the noise. It was faint at first, just a soft creak coming from upstairs. My body tensed. The townhouse was old and the heating system made all kinds of weird sounds. But this one was different. It was slow, deliberate, like someone stepping carefully across the floor. I held my breath, listening. Silence. I exhaled, forcing myself to relax. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I left a window open, and the wind moved something. Yeah, that had to be it. I turned over on the couch, pulling the blanket over my face. Whatever it was, I'd deal with it in the morning. And just like that, I drifted off. I don't know how long I was out, but when I woke up, something felt wrong. My head was still pounding, and my mouth was dry as hell. I pushed myself up, groggy as ever, and rubbed my face. The house was dead quiet, but there was this strange heaviness in the air, like something was off. I needed water. Slowly I got up and shuffled toward the kitchen. The hardwood floors creaked under my feet, and as I passed the hallway, something caught my eye. A thin strip of pale light stretched across the floor. I froze. The front door was open. Not just unlocked. Open. A few inches at most, but enough for the cold air to seep in, enough for the moonlight to spill across the entrance. I felt a sharp jolt of panic crawl up my spine. Had I left it open? No way. Even drunk, I wasn't that careless. I took a shaky step forward, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stop. That's when I heard it, a soft thud from upstairs. I stopped breathing. The sound wasn't loud, but in the dead silence of the house, it might as well have been an explosion. Someone was up there. I backed up, heart slamming against my ribs, my mind racing. 1,000 thoughts hit me at once. Did I lock the back door? Did I have anything in the house I could use as a weapon? Where was my phone? Then, voices, 2 of them. Low, casual, like they were just having a normal conversation. Inside my house. I swallowed hard and ducked behind the couch. My body was shaking, but I forced myself to stay still, to listen. They weren't whispering. They weren't rushing. They sounded comfortable, like they had been here for a while. That's when it hit me. They didn't break in while I was asleep. They were already inside before I even got home. I stayed crouched behind the couch, barely breathing. My mind kept racing, trying to piece everything together. If they were already inside before I got home, then they must have been watching me. Maybe for days, maybe longer. The voices drifted closer. I could hear them rummaging through drawers, shifting things around like they were looking for something specific. My stomach twisted. They weren't just some desperate thieves grabbing whatever they could. They had a plan. I could only catch bits and pieces of their conversation. Check the bedroom. Nothing in there. Try the office. They moved like they knew my house. I felt sweat pooling at the back of my neck as I pressed myself tighter against the couch. If they turned the corner and looked down, they'd see me. There was no way out. No weapon. No plan. Just me, frozen in place, waiting for the inevitable. Then, the footsteps changed direction. Closer. Each step felt heavier than the last, like they were deliberately slow, soaking in the moment. I could see their shadows stretching across the dimly lit floor. Then, a head peeked over the couch. I nearly stopped breathing, but he wasn't looking at me. The guy was checking between the couch cushions, probably looking for cash or jewelry. He was inches away, close enough that I could hear his breathing. Close enough that if he just turned his head a little to the right, he'd see me. I clenched my fists, every muscle in my body screaming at me to not move. And then, hey, my heart nearly stopped. For a split second I thought he was talking to me. But then the other guy called from across the room. Let's go. The man by the couch hesitated, then stood up. I heard them walking, their boots thudding against the hardwood. Then, the front door creaked. A moment of silence. And then one of them whispered, "See you next time." And they were gone. I didn't move. Not for a long time. I just sat there crouched behind the couch, listening to the silence they left behind. My heart was still hammering in my chest, my breath coming in short, shaky gasps. I wanted to believe it was over, that they were really gone. But that whisper, "See you next time," it wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Finally, I forced myself to move. My legs were stiff, my body sore from staying in the same position for so long. I reached for my phone, hands shaking as I dialed 911. The operator answered, but I barely processed what she was saying. My voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. There were people in my house. I kept the call going as I stood up on unsteady legs and inched toward the front door. It was wide open now, letting in the freezing Chicago air. I stepped outside, looking up and down the street. Nothing. No sign of them. No sign that any of this had just happened. By the time the cops arrived, I was still standing there, barefoot on the cold pavement, staring at my own front door like it was something foreign, something dangerous. They swept the house, asked me a million questions. I told them everything, the noises, the whisper, the way they moved through my home like they had been there before. One of the officers frowned. They didn't break in? I shook my head. The door was unlocked. Another officer, older, gave me a look. No forced entry, no rush, no panic. These guys knew what they were doing. I swallowed hard. What does that mean? It means, he said, glancing around the house, this probably wasn't their first time here. That thought made my stomach drop. The cops said they'd patrol the area for the next few nights, but I could tell by the way they spoke that there wasn't much they could do. They took my statement, advised me to change my locks, and told me to stay somewhere else if I could. I didn't sleep that night, didn't sleep the night after either, because every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. That whisper right before they left. See you next time. And I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe they were still watching. I grew up in La Crosse, Wisconsin, a quiet, rural town with more open fields than people. If you liked staring at trees, dirt roads, and being alone for long periods, it was the perfect place to be. But for me, I couldn't wait to get out. As soon as I turned 16 and saved enough money, I bought a car and started spending as much time as possible in Madison, the closest city with actual things to do. My parents sold our old house about 5 years ago, but I remember every detail of it. It sat on 4 acres of land with a big white farmhouse and an old tool shed in the backyard. I was 14 when this happened. My parents trusted me to be home alone by then. I had chores, responsibilities, and never really got into trouble. That weekend, they were out at some event in Minneapolis, leaving me alone for the night. It was around 9 p.m., and I was sitting in the living room playing Silent Hill 2 on my PS2, completely focused. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but inside, everything was warm and quiet. At least it was, until a loud metallic bang echoed from somewhere outside. I paused the game immediately. The sound was too heavy to be just the wind. My first thought was that maybe something fell over in the shed out back. My dad always told me to keep it locked, but sometimes the wind rattled the door loose. Still, something didn't feel right. I ran to every window, scanning the yard. The porch light cast a dull yellow glow across the grass, but I couldn't see anything until I got to the back window. The shed door was wide open. That thing was heavy. No way the wind did that. My stomach tightened as I grabbed my Remington 870 from the hallway closet. I wasn't looking to hurt anyone, but I damn sure wasn't going to walk out there unarmed. Pushing open the back door, I stepped into the cold night air. The trees swayed in the wind, casting long shadows across the ground. I walked carefully toward the shed, my finger resting on the trigger guard. When I was close enough, I shouted, "Who's in there?" No response. I took another step forward. "I have a gun." Still nothing. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of oil and dust. Tools, an old ATV, and lawn equipment filled the space, creating too many places for someone to hide. My heart pounded as I scanned the room. Nothing. After another tense moment, I backed out, shut the door, and locked it this time. I turned back toward the house, but as I walked up the steps to the porch, something felt off. Then, I saw it. The front door was open. I stopped dead in my tracks, staring at the wide-open front door. I knew I had shut it before going outside. I knew it. A sick, twisting feeling crept into my stomach. The air felt different, heavier somehow. I gripped the shotgun tighter and took a slow step forward. The porch light flickered slightly as I reached the doorway. The living room was just as I had left it. TV still on, PS2 paused on the menu screen, nothing out of place. but something felt wrong. I stepped inside and carefully shut the door behind me, locking it this time. My breathing was slow and controlled, but my hands were sweating. I listened. Silence. But I felt it. That deep, skin-prickling sensation that tells you you're being watched. I moved through the kitchen, checking each corner as I passed. The back door was still locked, no windows broken, no sign of a forced entry. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the door hadn't latched all the way when I went outside. That's what I told myself. But then I heard it. A faint creak from upstairs. I froze. The sound wasn't loud, but it was clear. A slow, deliberate shift in weight against the old wooden floorboards. Someone was upstairs. I swallowed hard. My first instinct was to call my dad, but my hands were shaking as I reached for the phone on the kitchen counter. I dialed. It rang. Straight to voicemail. I left a quick message, trying to keep my voice steady. As I hung up, another creak echoed from the second floor. I had two choices: stay put and wait, or go check it out myself. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put. But that was my house, my space. I wasn't about to let someone just walk in and do whatever they wanted. I picked up the shotgun again, my grip firm, and started toward the stairs. I stepped carefully, avoiding the spots I knew would creak. The old farmhouse was full of small noises, but this was different. When I reached the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched before me. 5 closed doors, 4 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. Another soft creak came from the far end. The master bedroom, my parents' room. I took a slow step forward, heart hammering. Then I did something I almost regret. I knelt down and looked under the door, and there they were, 2 bare feet standing perfectly still. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight I thought I was going to be sick. Those feet weren't mine, and they weren't moving. Whoever was in there was just standing on the other side of the door, completely still. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. My fingers tightened around the shotgun. But suddenly, a terrifying thought hit me. I wasn't ready to use it. I had no idea what I was dealing with. If I opened that door and someone lunged at me, would I even have the nerve to pull the trigger? I slowly stepped back, moving toward the stairs as quietly as I could. My legs felt weak, and my hands were shaking. Then, the floor creaked again. But this time, it wasn't from inside the room. It was behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped the shotgun. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I was losing it. I needed to get out of there. I turned and hurried down the stairs, skipping steps 2 at a time, trying not to make noise. My breath was shaky as I reached the first floor and rushed straight to the bathroom. Locking the door, I grabbed the phone again and called my dad. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. 1 more time. Still nothing. My hands felt numb as I dialed 911. The operator picked up immediately, and I whispered, explaining everything as quickly as I could. Then, before she could respond, I heard it. Heavy, slow footsteps coming down the stairs. They stopped just outside the bathroom door. Then a voice, deep, rough, almost amused. "What's the matter, kid?" I swear, if I ever hear that voice again, I'll recognize it instantly. It was so casual, like this was all a game to him. I gripped the shotgun so tight my knuckles ached. My breath hitched in my throat. The operator was still on the line, asking if I was safe. I made a decision. I raised my voice, forcing confidence into it. "I'm on the phone with the police right now. I have a gun." Silence. Then the doorknob twisted. It didn't open. I had locked it. I could hear him standing right there, waiting, thinking. Then slow footsteps, moving away. For a moment I didn't breathe. Then, bam! A door slammed. The back door. I exhaled so hard I almost collapsed. The operator was still talking, telling me to stay put. I barely heard her. My ears were ringing, my hands shaking. Minutes passed. Then, sirens. Bright red and blue lights flashed through the windows. I didn't move until I heard the knock at the front door and a voice calling out, "Sheriff's Department." I practically sprinted out of the bathroom. 2 officers entered, guns drawn. They checked every room, every closet, but he was gone. I told them everything. How I had gone outside, how I found the shed open, how I came back and saw the front door unlocked, how I saw those feet standing in my parents' room. Then, the worst part. They asked me if anything was missing. I did a quick check with them. Nothing was gone. Whoever that man was, he didn't break in to steal. He just wanted to be inside. I sat on the couch while the officers did one last sweep of the house. My shotgun was still in my hands, but at that point I barely had the strength to hold it. One of the officers, Deputy Harrison, crouched in front of me. "You did the right thing calling 911, kid," he said, his voice calm. "You're lucky you locked yourself in that bathroom." I didn't feel lucky. I felt violated, like my home wasn't mine anymore. The other officer came back from checking the backyard. "Footprints lead from the shed to the house," he said. "No signs of forced entry. The door was just open." I already knew what that meant. I had let him in. When I went outside to check the shed, I left the front door unlocked. That's when he walked in. That's when he went upstairs. That thought made me sick. He had been in the house the whole time, watching me, listening to me, maybe even standing in the hallway while I checked the downstairs rooms just out of sight. I shuddered. Deputy Harrison asked if I had somewhere else to stay for the night. I nodded. My uncle lives 10 minutes away. They called him and he was there in 15 minutes flat. When he walked in, I could tell by his face that he was trying not to freak out. He thanked the officers and led me outside. As I got into his truck, I glanced back at the house one last time. The front door was shut now. The porch light flickered. The night was quiet again, but I knew I'd never look at that house the same way again. The next day, my parents came home. My mom nearly burst into tears when she heard what happened. My dad, he was pissed. Not at me, at whoever had been in our house. The sheriff's department did a full investigation. They checked for fingerprints. Nothing. They looked at the security cameras from a gas station a mile away to see if anyone suspicious had been in the area. Still nothing. It was like the guy had just appeared out of nowhere and vanished. The only thing they had to go on were the footprints in the backyard. They were barefoot. That detail messed with me more than anything. Who breaks into a house without shoes? It wasn't just weird. It felt wrong. A week later, my dad went out and bought new locks, motion sensor lights, and a security system. But I never really felt safe there again. Every night, I'd lie in bed, staring at my door, thinking about those feet standing in my parents' room, thinking about that voice outside the bathroom, wondering if he had been in the house before. Years later, my parents sold the house. I was relieved. But even now, sometimes I dream about that night. It always plays out the same. I'm back in my old house playing my PS2. The loud bang echoes from the shed. I get up, look outside, see the open door. But in the dream, when I turn back to the house, the front door isn't open. Instead, I see him, standing inside, watching me through the window, barefoot. And then, in that deep, mocking voice, he says the same thing he did that night. "What's the matter, kid?" And I wake up, heart pounding, wondering the same thing I've wondered for years. If I hadn't noticed the door was open, if I had just gone back to playing my game, would he have just stayed hidden? Would he have just watched me from the shadows all night? Or would he have done something worse? I don't think I'll ever know. And maybe that's the scariest part of all, the not knowing. I live in a small rental house in Denver with my older sister Olivia. We moved in about 6 months ago, splitting the rent and bills. It's a quiet neighborhood, mostly families and retirees. Nothing ever really happens here. Last week, Olivia had to leave for a work event in Miami. She'd be gone for 5 days. She invited me to go with her, but I couldn't take time off from work. So early Monday morning, she packed her bags and left. I had the day off, so I cleaned the house a little, made myself some coffee, and just enjoyed having the place to myself. It was nice, at first. Later that afternoon, around 2, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I assumed it was maybe a package Olivia ordered. But when I opened the door, it wasn't a delivery. It was a man. He looked to be in his early 40s, dressed in a worn-out flannel and jeans, no package in hand, just standing there. His eyes lingered on mine a little too long, making me uncomfortable. "Hey, can I help you?" I asked. The man just smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It felt off. "Oh, I just wanted to see who lived here," he said. His tone was casual, but something about it made my stomach turn. Before I could say anything else, he nodded, took a step back, and walked away. I closed the door, locking it immediately. It was weird, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just some nosy neighbor. Still, the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. That night, I double-checked all the locks before going to bed. I told myself I was being paranoid, but even as I laid down, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Tuesday was a work day. I left early and got back around 6 in the evening. By the time I walked in, I was exhausted. I changed into comfortable clothes and started making dinner. I had barely started chopping vegetables when there was a knock at the door. My stomach dropped. I walked over slowly and peeked through the peephole. It was him. Same guy, same flannel, same unsettling smile. For a second, I thought about ignoring it. Maybe he'd just leave, but part of me felt like I needed to face him, figure out what he wanted. So I cracked the door open just an inch. Can I help you?" I asked again, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled wider. "Just checking on you." I blinked. "Checking on me? Are you my neighbor?" "No," he said, tilting his head slightly. "Just walking around." That was it. No explanation, no small talk. Just that. I forced a tight smile. "Okay, well, I'm fine. Have a good night." I shut the door and locked it immediately. I grabbed my phone and texted Olivia. "Have you ever seen this creepy guy around the neighborhood? Tall, 40s, flannel, keeps coming to the house." Her response came a few minutes later. "No? What the hell? Lock the doors. If he comes back, call the cops." That's when I realized my hands were shaking. That night I sat on the couch with all the lights on, jumping at every little sound. I wanted to believe it was just some harmless weirdo, but deep down, I knew better. The next 2 days were quiet. No knocks, no weird noises, nothing. At first I felt relieved. Maybe he had just been some random guy passing through. Maybe he realized he was creeping me out and decided to leave me alone. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. Because if he was just some harmless stranger, why had he come back the second time? And why had he acted like checking on me was normal? I started getting paranoid. Every time I left for work, I felt like someone was watching me. I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder on the way to my car. I started locking the door the second I got inside. I even checked my security camera app. The house didn't have cameras, but some of the neighbors had them, and a few of them shared footage in a local Facebook group. I scrolled through the posts, hoping to see something. Maybe the guy wandering around the neighborhood, something to prove I wasn't losing it. But there was nothing. I wanted to believe it was over, that he was gone. And for a little while, I almost convinced myself. But then came Friday night. It was around 8 p.m. I was curled up on the couch watching some random show, finally feeling like I could relax. Then I heard it. A scraping sound. At first, I thought maybe it was just a tree branch in the wind. But then it happened again. Something was dragging against the siding of the house, slow and deliberate. I muted the TV, my heart pounding. For a second, I just sat there, barely breathing. Then I got up and crept to the window, carefully pulling back the curtain. There was nothing there, just the dark outline of my yard, barely visible in the dim porch light. I was about to let out a relieved breath when I noticed something. The bushes beneath the window. One of them was shaking. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft but fast, disappearing into the darkness. I slammed the curtain shut, my entire body trembling. How long had he been out there? Was he watching me? Had he been sitting in those bushes the whole time? I grabbed my phone and called Olivia. She picked up on the third ring. "Hey, what's up?" I could barely get the words out. "I think someone's outside the house." She immediately sounded more alert. "Wait, what? Who? Did you see them?" "I didn't see him, but I heard something, and the bushes were moving." "Lock everything, turn off the lights, and if he comes back, call the cops." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, okay." We stayed on the phone for a while, Olivia trying to calm me down. I told myself I was overreacting, that it could have been an animal or the wind, or... Then came the knock. Loud, desperate. I nearly dropped my phone. The knocking didn't stop. It started slow. 3 solid bangs against the door. Then silence. Then another set. Harder, more frantic. I was frozen. My phone was still pressed against my ear, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "Emily." Olivia's voice pulled me back. "He's here," I whispered. She cursed under her breath. "Call 911, right now." I could barely make my fingers work as I pulled up the keypad. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Before I could dial, the man's voice came through the door. Hey, I need help, please." I didn't respond. I didn't move. "I think I hurt myself. I just need to come inside for a second." His voice was shaky, desperate, but something about it felt wrong, forced. I stayed silent, gripping my phone so tight my knuckles ached. Then he started apologizing. "Look, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you, I swear, just open up, okay?" His tone changed again, pleading, almost gentle, like he was trying to soothe a scared animal. Then his voice dropped lower, and what he said next made my blood turn to ice. "I know you're in there, Emily." I nearly dropped the phone. How did he know my name? I turned and ran to the kitchen, ducking behind the counter as I finally dialed 911. The ringing felt like it lasted forever. 911, what's your emergency?" I kept my voice low, afraid he'd hear me. "There's a man outside my house. He won't leave. He knows my name." The operator's voice was calm, professional. "Are your doors locked?" "Yes." "Are you alone?" "Yes." "Stay on the line. Officers are on their way." The pounding on the door got worse. I could hear the wood creaking under the force. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. I stayed crouched in the kitchen, barely breathing. And then, footsteps. Not leaving, circling. I stayed on the phone, barely able to get words out as I listened to the footsteps move around the house. They were slow, deliberate. Then came another sound. Metal rattling. The back door. "He's trying to get in," I whispered. The operator was still calm. "Officers are 3 minutes away. Stay quiet, don't engage." I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the phone with both hands. My legs were shaking so bad I thought they'd give out. Then, nothing. No more footsteps. No more rattling, just silence. It was worse than the noise, the waiting, the not knowing. Minutes crawled by. Then finally, red and blue lights flashed through the window. I stayed hidden until I heard the knock on the door. "Denver PD, ma'am. You can open up." I practically ran to the door, yanking it open to find 2 officers standing on the porch. My entire body was shaking. They searched the area, checked the locks, walked the perimeter of the house. Nothing. Whoever he was gone. One of the officers, a guy in his late 30s with a kind face, looked at me seriously. "You did the right thing calling us. Do you know him?" I shook my head. "No. Never seen him before last Monday." He nodded. "We'll have extra patrols in the area. If he comes back, don't hesitate, call us immediately." I thanked them, locked the door, and sat on the floor, still shaking. I wanted to believe it was over, that he wouldn't come back. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. The next morning, I barely slept. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow outside sent a shiver down my spine. Olivia was flying back later that evening, and I just needed to get through the day. Around noon, there was a soft knock at the door. I nearly had a heart attack, but when I peeked through the peephole, it wasn't him. It was Mrs. Callahan, my neighbor from 2 houses down. She was in her late 60s, the kind of lady who knew everything that happened on the block. I hesitated before opening the door, but I needed to hear what she had to say. "Morning, dear," she said, frowning. "I just wanted to check on you. I saw the police here last night." I nodded. "Yeah. Some guy was creeping around my house. You didn't happen to see anything, did you?" Her frown deepened. "Not last night, but... honey, I saw a man standing outside your house on Monday. I thought he was a friend of yours. He was just... watching." My stomach dropped. "Monday? During the day?" She nodded. "Around noon. He stood across the street for a while, then walked up your driveway like he belonged there. That meant he had been watching even before he knocked on my door. I felt like I couldn't breathe." "Mrs. Callahan, what did he look like?" She described him perfectly. The flannel, the jeans, the way he stood, just a little too still. "Honey, I don't want to scare you," she said softly. "But he wasn't lost. He was waiting for something." Olivia got home that night. I told her everything. She immediately went into protective big sister mode, saying we needed security cameras, new locks, maybe even a baseball bat by the door. I agreed with all of it. But even with the extra security, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. For the next few days, I was on edge. I checked the cameras obsessively, flinched at every noise, barely slept. And then, just as I started to let my guard down, something happened. On Wednesday morning, Olivia went to work early and I was home alone. When I stepped outside to grab the mail, I noticed something on the porch. A single footprint, too big to be Olivia's, too fresh to be old. It was right in front of the door, like someone had stood there, watching, waiting. I looked up and down the street. No one was there. I never saw the man again. But I never forgot him. And to this day, every time I hear a knock at the door, I hesitate before answering, because I know some monsters don't go away. I had just wrapped up work for the day. It wasn't anything special, just one of those nights where I wanted to relax, eat some junk food, and mindlessly watch TV before knocking out. Bailey, my German shepherd, was stretched out on the couch next to me, dead asleep. He'd had a long day too. It was 11:50 p.m. when Bailey suddenly lifted his head. His ears perked up and he stared toward the back door. At first, I didn't think much of it. He did that sometimes, heard something outside, got curious. But then he got up, walked to the door, and scratched at it. All right, I sighed, getting up to let him out. I had a fenced backyard, nothing huge, but enough for Bailey to sniff around and do his thing. I usually didn't have to keep an eye on him. He always came back in when he was done. While he was outside, I picked up the dishes, wiped down the counter, and threw out some empty snack bags. Then I heard it. Bailey barking. Not as usual, "Hey, there's a squirrel" bark. This was deeper, sharper, like he was warning something. I went to the back door and opened it. Bailey was standing by the fence, locked in place, barking at the tree line beyond the yard. My house backed up to a dense patch of woods, and honestly, I couldn't see much past the fence, just trees and darkness. "Bailey, come on," I called out. He didn't move. I stepped outside, feeling the cold air bite my skin. The night was dead silent. No wind, no crickets, nothing. That's when it hit me. It was too quiet. Something was wrong. I whistled. "Bailey, inside, now." Finally, he turned and ran back in, still glancing over his shoulder at the fence. As soon as he was inside, I locked the door. My gut told me to check the yard one last time. I flipped the porch light on. Nothing. Just trees swaying slightly in the breeze. I shook my head. Probably a raccoon or something, I muttered, trying to convince myself. Bailey, however, wasn't convinced. I sat back down on the couch trying to get back into my show, but something had shifted. Bailey wasn't acting like himself. Normally, after coming back inside, he'd curl up beside me or go lay by his bed. But tonight, he sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, ears up, eyes locked on the back door. I patted the couch beside me. "Come on, bud. Relax." He barely glanced at me before going right back to staring at the door. I followed his gaze, my stomach twisting. The door was closed. The blinds were drawn. Nothing should have been there. "Seriously, Bailey, there's nothing there," I muttered, more for myself than for him. But he didn't stop. Not for hours. I checked the back door a few times, peeking through the blinds, but saw nothing. Even so, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. It was almost 2 a.m. when I finally gave up and decided to head upstairs. Bailey followed me, but not in his usual relaxed way. His movements were slow, calculated, like he was still expecting something. I left my bedroom door slightly open, like always. His food and water were downstairs, and he liked having access. Usually he either slept at the foot of my bed or in his own dog bed in the corner. But that night he didn't. Instead, he sat right in the doorway, facing the hallway. I sighed. "All right, man, you do you." I turned over, pulled the covers up, and closed my eyes. At 2:43 a.m., I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. Then I heard it. A soft click, followed by the slow creak of a door. My bedroom door was wider open than before. Bailey was gone. My heart started pounding the second I realized Bailey wasn't in the room. I sat up, listening. The house was too quiet. No sound of his nails clicking on the hardwood. No faint lapping of water from his bowl downstairs. Just silence. I glanced at the door. It was open wider than I had left it. I knew for a fact I hadn't done that. A weird chill ran down my spine. Maybe Bailey pushed it open when he left the room. Maybe. But something about it felt off. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up slowly. Every nerve in my body was on high alert. The hallway stretched out in front of me, dark except for the faint glow coming from the stairway. I stepped out, my breathing slow, controlled. "Bailey?" I whispered. No response. I moved down the hall, straining to hear anything. A breath, a shuffle, anything. When I reached the top of the stairs, I stopped. Something was different. The air smelled off. Not like dust or old wood, more like sweat. Like someone had been moving around in my house. My skin prickled. Slowly, I started down the stairs, gripping the railing. The light from the living room cast long shadows on the walls. I turned the corner into the kitchen, and there he was. Bailey was curled up under the table, shaking. His eyes were wide, locked onto something behind me. That's when I saw it. The back door was open. I froze. I had locked that door. I was sure of it. The cold night air drifted in, and I could hear the faint rustling of leaves outside. My stomach twisted into a knot. I needed to think. Maybe I left it open somehow. Maybe the latch didn't catch. Maybe... Bailey let out a low whimper. I looked down at him, and that's when I noticed the floor. There were footprints, not just leading out the door. They led inside. My pulse slammed against my ribs. The prints were muddy, smudged. Some of them trailed toward the kitchen, but others... My eyes darted toward the stairs. Some of them went up. My throat went dry. Had someone been inside while I was asleep? Had they been upstairs? I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to run, to grab Bailey and bolt out the front door, but I was frozen. Every part of me was screaming to move, but I just stood there, staring at those footprints. Then I heard it. A creak. From upstairs. Someone was still inside the house, my body locked up. That creak. It came from upstairs. Every instinct told me to run, grab Bailey, and get the hell out. But I couldn't move. My breath was shallow. My legs felt like lead. I kept staring at the footprints, at the ones leading upstairs. Bailey whimpered again, but he didn't move from under the table. He was too scared. Then, another sound, a slow, deliberate step. My mouth went dry. Someone was up there. Right now. The realization sent a jolt of panic through me. My mind was racing. What do I do? Do I grab something to defend myself? Call the police? Try to sneak out? Then I remembered. My phone was upstairs. I had left it on my nightstand when I went to bed. A sharp chill ran down my spine. Whoever was up there, they had been in my room. They had been near me while I slept. A cold sweat broke out across my skin. Bailey let out a low growl, his eyes still fixed on the stairs. Then, another step. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to be quiet anymore. I couldn't wait. I had to get out. Slowly, I reached for Bailey, keeping my eyes locked on the stairwell. My fingers brushed against his collar, and the second I gripped it, I heard it. A sudden, fast movement, like someone rushing down the hall upstairs. I snapped into action. I grabbed Bailey and bolted for the back door. I didn't care who or what was up there. I just needed to be gone. The cold air hit me like a brick as I stumbled outside, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking so bad I fumbled with the latch, barely locking it in time. Bailey was already pulling toward the gate. I didn't even hesitate. I ran with him, barefoot, across the yard and out onto the street. I didn't stop running until I reached my neighbor's house. I pounded on their door like my life depended on it. Seconds felt like hours before the porch light flickered on, and Mr. Davis, a retired firefighter in his 60s, opened the door, squinting at me. "Jesus, Nathan, what's going on?" I couldn't even speak. I just gasped. "Call the police." The cops arrived fast. I sat on my neighbor's porch, gripping Bailey's collar so hard my fingers hurt. My mind was spinning. What if I had stayed? What if I had gone upstairs? The officers searched the house while another asked me questions. I told them everything. The door, the footprints, the sounds upstairs. One of them tried to reassure me. Could be a squatter, maybe a break-in gone wrong. But I knew better. Something wasn't right. It took 30 minutes before they came back outside. The officer in charge, a guy named Detective Alvarez, had a serious look on his face. "No one's inside," he said. "But we did find something." He motioned for me to follow. I hesitated, but I had to know. Walking back into my house felt wrong. The air was thick, like whatever had been there had left a stain. We stopped at the foot of the stairs. An officer pointed at something. More footprints. Only this time they were leading downstairs. Whoever had been up there had come down after me. I swallowed hard. "Anything missing?" Detective Alvarez shook his head. "No, but we found this." He held up a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a knife, a long, serrated hunting knife. I felt sick. "Where was that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Upstairs, in the hallway closet." My stomach dropped. That closet was right next to my bedroom door. Whoever had been in my house hadn't just been wandering around. They had been waiting for me. I didn't sleep that night. Hell, I barely slept for weeks after. I moved out of that house within the month. I don't know who it was, what they wanted, or how long they had been watching me. But here's what haunts me the most. I keep thinking about how, when I woke up, my door was open wider than before, which means that whoever it was had already been in my room before I even woke up. And I never even knew. My parents were heading out for their anniversary trip, a whole week. My sister had already moved out, so I was completely alone. It wasn't a big deal. I had been alone before. But something about this time felt different. Maybe it was the way the trees surrounded our house, dense and dark. Maybe it was how the long dirt driveway cut us off from the world, with only a quiet back road connecting us to town. Maybe it was just the silence, People in our town all knew each other. You never saw a stranger twice. If someone stopped at the gas station, the grocery store, or the local bar, they belonged here. So when I pulled into the gas station that afternoon, I immediately noticed the man in the black Jeep Cherokee. He wasn't one of us. He parked at the pump next to mine. Mid-40s, short beard, dark eyes. He nodded at me in that friendly, small-town way and started filling his tank. I focused on my own pump, but then he walked around to my side. "Excuse me," he said, holding up a small notepad. "Do you know how to get to the interstate from here?" I hesitated. Who the hell writes down directions on paper in 2024? Still, I told him the best way to get to Interstate 40. He scribbled it down instead of using his phone. Weird. "Thanks," he said, then looked at me a little too long. "You from around here?" A cold feeling crept up my spine. "Yeah," I said cautiously. He smiled. "Too much." "Nice. I'm from out of town," he said, but never mentioned where. Then right before getting back into his car, he asked, "What's your name?" I wanted to lie. My gut screamed at me to lie, but for some reason I didn't. "Emily," I said. His smile widened. "That's a beautiful name, Emily." And then he left. I got into my car and drove off, relieved that the interaction was over, until I looked in my rearview mirror. The black Jeep Cherokee was right behind me. I slowed down near my driveway, pretending to check my phone. He drove past, but not towards the highway. He was going the opposite direction, the one that led straight into the woods. That night, everything felt wrong. I distracted myself with Netflix, trying not to think about the gas station. But every time I glanced at the windows, I felt like something was watching me. By 9 p.m., I had convinced myself I was overreacting. I had plans to meet up with some friends, and staying home alone sounded worse than going out. I stepped outside, locking the front door behind me. Then, a sound from the trees. Rustling. I froze. We had deer, raccoons, all sorts of animals around here. But this wasn't that. This was slow, heavy, deliberate. I forced myself to move, walking quickly to my car. Hours later, I came back, pulling into the driveway around 1 a.m. The house stood in complete darkness except for the soft glow of the porch light. As I stepped out of the car, a voice whispered from the woods, "Emily." I stopped breathing. It was a man's voice, soft, drawn out, almost playful. My body locked up. I scanned the tree line, but the dark swallowed everything. My hands shook as I fumbled for my keys. I ran to the door, yanked it open, and slammed it shut behind me. I stood there, heart hammering. Who the hell would call my name like that and not show themselves? I grabbed my phone and called my parents. "Emily, calm down," my mom said sleepily. "It's probably one of the neighbors messing around." No. No one would do that. And I never told them about the man at the gas station. The next morning, I felt like I was going crazy. I hadn't slept. Every creak, every shift in the house made my skin crawl. I stayed inside all day. Every time I looked out the window, the trees seemed closer. That night, I almost canceled my plans, but I needed to get out of the house. I stepped onto the porch, and then I heard it. "Emily." Closer this time. I turned and ran back inside, locking the door behind me. I called 911. 2 cops showed up 15 minutes later. They checked the yard, the woods, the driveway. Nothing. "If it happens again, call us," one of them said. That was it. That night I stayed awake, watching the front door, waiting for something to move. The next day, I had work. I left in broad daylight, scanning the woods the whole way to my car. Nothing. For the first time in 2 days, I felt relief. That feeling vanished the moment I got home. As I stepped out of my car, I heard a creak from the porch, then a voice. "Don't call the cops on me again, sweetheart." I felt my stomach drop. The porch light cast a dim glow over the trees, just enough to show a tall shadow standing at the edge of the woods. Watching. I choked on my breath. My legs finally worked, and I stumbled back inside, locking everything. I called 911 again. The cops came. They searched. Again, nothing, except for one thing. A single muddy footprint, right below my bedroom window. My parents begged me to stay with a friend. Josh told me to call him before I got in my car. I agreed. Before stepping outside, I checked every window. No movement. I locked the door behind me, moving quickly to my car. Then, a noise. Rustling, quick, sharp. I turned my head. A man stood inches from my car window, wearing a mask. Not a Halloween mask, not a ski mask. A blank white mask, with dark holes where the eyes should be. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then, he yanked the door handle. I couldn't even scream. I threw myself inside, hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. Bang! His elbow slammed against the glass. Bang! Again. Finally, the car roared to life. I floored it, didn't stop until I reached Josh's house. We called the cops. The cops searched the house. They found nothing. But that wasn't the part that haunted me. It was the message scratched into my bedroom window. See you soon, Emily. I moved out a month later. The Jeep was never seen again. But sometimes, even now, I hear my name whispered in the dark.